So before I dive into this story, I should mention something important. I have a mild form of Tourette syndrome. It's nothing too bad. Mainly just some muscle tics and twitching, especially in my hands and arms. I never had any verbal tics, thankfully, so I didn't have to deal with constant teasing in school. Still, people would sometimes notice the twitching, and I was occasionally labeled as the twitchy kid. I got used to it though, it was mostly harmless. Now, on to the story. This happened around 10 years ago when I was still in school. I had this English teacher, and let's just say he was a bit temperamental. He wasn't a bad teacher, but he could be very sensitive. If anyone even suggested that his class was boring, he would react like you had just insulted something deeply personal to him. He really had a tendency to take things to heart. One day, I was in his class working on some homework when I came across a question I just couldn't figure out. Instead of raising my hand and risking embarrassing myself in front of everyone, I decided I'd wait until my free period to ask for help from my resource teacher. So I put my homework away and thought I'd read a Percy Jackson book I had in my locker. I raised my hand to ask if I could go get the book, but as soon as I did, one of my twitching fits started. My hands clenched up and my fingers did that weird clapping thing they do when I'm having a tic. It's strange, but it almost sounds like I'm snapping my fingers. My English teacher noticed immediately, and he didn't seem to like it one bit. He turned sharply, his face red, and stomped over to my desk. Without saying a word, he started snapping his fingers right in my face, mimicking the sound my hand had made. I was completely taken off guard, and he seemed to be furious. The way he acted, you'd think I'd done something terrible. He snapped his fingers at me repeatedly, making a point of it, almost as if he was trying to make me feel like I was beneath him. I just sat there, confused, not knowing what to say. When I finally found my voice, I tried to explain that I hadn't snapped at him intentionally. I told him I had Tourette syndrome, that my tics caused the weird clapping motion in my hands. I even demonstrated what had happened with my hand, but instead of understanding, this just seemed to push him over the edge. He accused me of making excuses and told me to go to the principal's office right away. He added that he'd be down there soon to talk about how dehumanizing my behavior had been. I felt my heart drop. He wasn't just angry, he seemed disgusted with me. Terrified, I grabbed all of my stuff and bolted. I didn't even stop at the office like he'd told me to. I just ran. I ran halfway home, then caught the bus for the rest of the way. Once I got home, I went straight to my room and hid under my blankets, cuddling with my cat to calm myself down. I kept thinking about what had just happened, and the more I thought about it, the more scared I got. I started imagining all sorts of things. Maybe I'd be suspended, or worse. Maybe I'd get into serious trouble. A few hours later, I heard the front door open. My mom had come home from work and I could hear her checking the answering machine. A couple of minutes later, she knocked on my bedroom door. She sounded calm when she asked if I had left school early, but I could hear the confusion in her voice. At first, I didn't answer, hoping maybe she'd just leave me alone, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. I opened the door and let her in. I explained everything. I told her about the teacher snapping at me, how I had a tic, and how I'd panicked and run straight home. I expected her to be angry with me, but instead she looked completely shocked. She couldn't believe what the teacher had done, all because he thought I'd snapped at him. She assured me that my condition was documented and she'd make sure the principal knew about what had happened. Hearing that lifted a huge weight off my chest. I realized my mom wasn't upset with me, she was upset with him. It made me feel so much better. The next morning when I got to school, the principal was standing outside greeting students as usual. When he saw me, he gave me a reassuring smile and told me not to worry. Everything had been handled. That was the last I heard of it. As for my English teacher, he didn't speak to me for the rest of the year. He just ignored me completely, which, honestly, was fine by me. I didn't need any more attention from him after that. A little context. I have asthma, and I've had it since I was 3 years old. The smell of strong chemicals, like pesticides and detergents, triggers my asthma attacks. I always keep my inhaler with me just in case, and over the years, I've learned to manage it well. Now for the story. I was at my usual grocery store doing a quick run for some frozen breakfast burritos and toilet paper. I shop there all the time, so I usually know where things are. But the store had recently rearranged the aisles, and I had no idea where they'd moved the toilet paper. So, I was wandering around checking different sections. I happened to pass by the cleaning products aisle. The second I realized where I was, I bolted. Normally, I steer clear of that aisle because, asthma and all. The cleaning chemicals are basically my kryptonite. When I was making my swift exit, I noticed a woman in that same aisle spraying air fresheners into the air like she was testing them out. She noticed me running off and started yelling for me to come over. I didn't think she could possibly be talking to me. I wasn't wearing a uniform, and I had a shopping basket in my hand, clearly doing my own errands. So, I ignored her and kept walking, focused on my mission to find the toilet paper. But suddenly, I felt a hand grip my elbow. She grabbed me and started yelling in my face, calling me a witch and accusing me of ignoring her. I turned to face her and saw she was standing way too close, with her mask hanging around her chin. She was wearing bright red lipstick that clashed horribly with her whole look. Instinctively, I stepped back, trying to maintain some distance, especially since I'm high risk for getting sick. I quickly asked her to put her mask back on, explaining that I was high risk. She scoffed at me, saying I had no right to tell her what to do and that she was in charge. She insisted that I come over and help her pick out which air freshener smelled better. At this point, my chest was starting to feel tight from the fumes of the air fresheners she had been spraying, and I tried to back away even more. But she kept demanding that I come closer. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, she yanked the cap off one of the air fresheners and sprayed it right in my face. Twice. She wanted me to compare the scents, but all I could think about was the fact that I could barely breathe. My asthma attack had fully kicked in, and I dropped my basket, frantically searching my bag for my inhaler. My hands were shaking, but I managed to find it. Before I could use it, though, she grabbed my hand and demanded I help her first. She told me to deal with my drugs later, as if my inhaler was some kind of casual thing I could wait on. With whatever strength I had left, I pushed her away. She stumbled back, giving me just enough time to take a puff from my inhaler. The relief was immediate, but I was still trying to catch my breath, coming down from the shock of what just happened, when I heard her screaming again. She was now yelling for someone to fire me, accusing me of assaulting her and demanding that I be arrested. Confused, I looked up and saw her standing next to a man who appeared to be the manager. He had a look of pure horror on his face, his eyes wide and concerned. He quickly asked if I was okay and came over to help me stand. He even picked up my basket and the things that had fallen out of my backpack. I told him I was feeling better but needed to sit down and catch my breath. Meanwhile, the woman kept yelling, insisting that he fire me immediately and that I could breathe on the way to the police station for what she called assaulting an elderly woman. Which was funny because she didn't look older than 35. The manager, clearly fed up, told her to stop talking and led me to his office. All the while, she kept shouting after us. Once we were in the office, I sat by the window, trying to breathe easier while the manager handed me some water. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door and she excitedly announced that the police had arrived. The manager opened the door and 2 police officers stepped in. The manager, still focused on my well-being, asked if I wanted to press charges. At that moment, the woman's expression turned from smug satisfaction to pure shock. She started shouting again, claiming that she was the one who had been assaulted and that I should be the one getting in trouble. That's when I'd had enough and yelled back at her, calling her out for her stupidity. I reminded her that I clearly didn't work there and that she had just watched me have an asthma attack right in front of her. The officers asked both of us to explain what happened. I told them everything, sticking to the truth about my asthma and how she sprayed the air freshener in my face. She tried to spin some wild story about me attacking her, but the officers didn't seem interested in her version of events. They asked the manager for the security footage, and he happily showed them the video. After watching the footage, one of the officers turned to me and asked if I wanted to press charges for assault. I immediately said yes. The woman was stunned into silence as they put handcuffs on her and led her out of the store. The manager apologized again and offered to give me my groceries for free. He even asked if I wanted him to call an ambulance, but I assured him that I was fine and just wanted to go home. And that's what I did. I went home, ate my burrito, and tried to forget the whole ordeal. Before I start this story, I have to give a little backstory. I'm a 19-year-old guy, and when I was younger, around 14, I used to take Taekwondo classes. I worked my way up to black belt and really enjoyed it. Over the years, I've had a few encounters with parents bringing their aggressive kids in for free trials, and most of the time the instructor handled it well. But nothing could have prepared me for this incident. It still makes my blood boil to this day. I was in a Taekwondo class every Tuesday and Thursday for about an hour. Thursdays were for kids 13 and older, so it was a more serious environment, but Tuesdays were open to any age, which meant I was often helping teach younger kids as part of my instructor training. That experience was going to help me land a job teaching martial arts someday, so I took it seriously. But one specific Tuesday was nothing short of a disaster. About 10 minutes into the class, we were already working on basic punches and kicks when I heard a commotion from the stairs. An entitled mother, let's call her Karen, came rushing in with her kid trailing behind her, whining and looking like trouble. This kid was about 7 years old, and I could tell from the start that he was going to be a handful. Karen and her kid caused a scene as they reached the instructor. The instructor motioned for me to take over the class while he dealt with them. I had no problem with that. I was used to working with the younger kids, so I jumped into teaching a basic punching technique. Suddenly, the kid burst through the door like he owned the place and ran straight for the punching bags at the back of the room. I was crouched down helping another student with their punch when this little terror came over and pushed me. He started punching the bag wildly like it was a game. I stood up, brushed myself off, and calmly told him that he couldn't behave like that with other people around. The kid turned and gave me the angriest look I'd ever seen on a child, and then he shouted at me, calling me a crazy jerk. But it wasn't the word jerk he used. It was much worse. I was speechless, completely shocked at the foul language coming from a kid so young. He just skipped off like nothing had happened, and I decided I'd leave it to the instructor to handle. I had to keep the class moving, so I turned my attention back to the other students. When I continued helping the class, I noticed the kid talking to his mom, and Karen gave me a look of disgust, like I was the problem. She said something to the instructor, and he looked confused by whatever complaint she was making. I considered going over to explain, but before I could, another student asked me for help, so I focused on that. A little while later, the kid came out of the bathroom wearing a brand new uniform that already had a wet stain on it. We all knew what that was. He started talking loudly to the other kids about some video game, not paying any attention to the class. Thankfully, the instructor noticed and told the kid he needed to either focus on the lesson or sit out. The kid groaned in an exaggerated, obnoxious way before reluctantly agreeing to listen. The instructor asked me to put the punching bags back, which I did, and then I grabbed a drink of water and sat down to wait for the next demonstration. When the instructor called me up to help with a partner exercise, the kid came over with a huge grin on his face and asked if I would be his partner. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I agreed anyway. We were practicing a hair grab escape, and the kid immediately insisted that he be the one to grab my hair first. I had a bad feeling about it, but I decided to give him a chance. Big mistake. As soon as he grabbed my hair, he yanked as hard as he could and started laughing. It hurt, but I kept calm and did a basic takedown move, gently kicking the back of his leg so he'd fall onto the mat. But instead of letting go, he held onto my hair and pulled me down with him. I could feel some of my hair getting yanked out. I couldn't help it. I snapped and shouted, asking why on earth he would do that. Before I had time to react, Karen rushed over, screaming at me and accusing me of hurting her son. She threw out accusations, calling me names I won't repeat, and claimed I had done something terrible. The kid, of course, started whining about how he couldn't feel his leg, making it sound like I had seriously injured him. Out of nowhere, Karen swung her purse at my face, hitting me hard. The instructor rushed over, trying to calm things down and telling everyone to leave. I grabbed my bag, still fuming and nursing the bruise on my face from Karen's attack. I headed outside to wait for the bus, hoping to just leave this whole mess behind. But as I stood there, a car pulled up next to me. Of course, it was Karen and her kid. She rolled down the window and with a sneer, told me that I'd be hearing from them soon. She claimed her son was now permanently disabled and that I would be responsible for his medical bills. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she threw a full water bottle at me before speeding off, her kid grinning like he'd won something. Right now, I'm seriously considering contacting management to get the CCTV footage so I can file a police report. There's no way I'm letting Karen get away with hitting me in the face with her purse. A few years ago, I was really struggling. I've been going from job to job, barely getting by, and things weren't looking great. That's how I ended up working at a nationwide pizza chain. Again. I say again because I'd worked for them on and off since I was a teenager. By the time I was 30, I had 15 years of experience in every role imaginable at several locations. With that much time under my belt, I figured I'd be moving up the ranks by now. I mean, 15 years should count for something, right? So after a few months back on the job, I went to the regional manager and asked how I could become a manager. I had more experience than most of the current managers, so I thought I had a good shot. The regional manager made it clear that the only thing standing in my way was the fact that I didn't have my own car. He said if I could get reliable transportation, then he'd promote me. I was desperate, so I made it happen. I found a dealership willing to lease me a car for a small down payment, even though the interest rate was outrageous. But at that point, I was willing to struggle through it if it meant climbing up the ladder. Unfortunately, once I became a manager, I realized I'd been tricked. Sure, I got a raise, but it was only a measly $1 more per hour. In exchange, I had way more responsibilities. I had to clean the entire store during closing shifts, sometimes staying until 4 a.m., and handle every customer and employee issue. Still, I told myself it was worth it. I wasn't going back to the streets. I had to keep pushing forward. Then came the day that really set things off. Super Bowl Sunday, the busiest day of the year for any pizza place. All the managers were scheduled to come in at 9 a.m. to prep. I've always prided myself on being punctual, so I showed up right on time and got to work. No one else was there yet, but I figured they were just running a little late. By 10 a.m., one of the other managers finally arrived, looking like he had partied way too hard the night before. He was clearly hungover and wasn't any help at all. He just stumbled around the store, making things worse. Then, slowly but surely, the other two managers showed up, each about an hour after the other. By the time we were all finally there, it was already late in the morning and I was beyond frustrated. But I tried to keep it together and do my job. After all, it was Super Bowl Sunday, and we had to power through. At some point, the regional manager, Jeff, decided to drop by. Jeff and I had known each other since we were teenagers. We'd both started with the company around the same time, but he hadn't worked in a busy store like ours in years. These days, his job mostly consisted of checking in on different locations and making sure they had everything they needed. But for some reason, on this particular day, Jeff decided he wanted to help out. It was a complete mess. He was dropping food on the floor, putting the wrong items in the wrong boxes, and messing up the delivery routes. He just couldn't keep up, and instead of admitting his mistakes, he blamed us for every single thing that went wrong. No one said anything because, well, he was technically the boss. After 12 straight hours of working with no break, I decided to slip out the back for a quick smoke. I didn't plan on being gone long, just enough time to get a quick breather. I lit my cigarette and took a couple of puffs, but then I heard the phone ringing inside. Being responsible, I tossed my cigarette and went back in to help. As soon as I stepped back inside, I saw Jeff standing there, glaring at me like I'd committed some kind of unforgivable sin. Before I could even explain myself, he made it clear he wasn't happy about my little smoke break. He told me I needed to leave immediately as if I hadn't been the only one to show up on time and pull my weight that day. I had worked 12 hours straight, made zero mistakes, and now he was sending me home 2 hours before my shift was supposed to end. Instead of arguing, I stayed calm. I didn't want to make a scene, so I left without a fuss. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next morning, I was supposed to open the store. Instead, I left my store key on the manager's desk along with a handwritten note saying I was quitting. I snapped a picture of it and sent it to my co-workers, who were probably still asleep at that hour. The store didn't open that day. They lost hundreds of dollars in business, and Jeff had to scramble to figure out what had gone wrong. By the time anyone realized I wasn't coming back, it was too late. I didn't care though. Within a week, I found a better paying job with way less stress. Now I'm making triple what I made back then, and I've heard that Jeff still complains about me. Apparently, he tells people I must be living off my parents or something. Well, Jeff, wherever you are, I'm doing just fine on my own.